Welcome to Behind the Grind. I'm Matt Donnelly, and joining us today by way of the FTN network, a good old Florence Ontario boy here in Canada, the heavyweight champion of fantasy sports, the World Class Maniac himself, Eric Young. How you doing, Eric?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I mean, nobody knows where Florence is. Has a population of about maybe 60 people. The closest town would be Chatham, Ontario, 40,000. Windsor, Ontario, right across from Detroit. But yeah, tiny little town in the middle of nowhere.
You know what? I feel this. So I'm originally from a town called Seven Persons, Alberta, where our population was slightly more than seven, probably in that 200 type range. I think we had one yield sign, no traffic lights. But you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, that was the best kind of way to grow up. That's how you learn things, by not having anything to work with. So that being said, coming from a town of 60 people to where you are today, I mean, that's kind of a big deal. Like, not many people in that small town see themselves going to the extent that you have. First off, in fantasy with FTN, which is one of the biggest names in fantasy sports in general, but not to mention the whole TNA, NXT, WWE type trajectory that you had there with your professional wrestling career. So, and it wasn't just all, there's been some trials and tribulations in that wrestling thing too. Part of your ear being ripped off at one point, putting your body through all this for the enjoyment of fans. You may be the only guest I've ever had on the show that's probably had more surgeries and injuries than I have, and I've got a little bit of a list there to work with. That being said, one of the first questions I ask every guest is, if you're coming in to close out a ball game in the ninth inning, usually I say come down to the wrestling ring, but that seems a little too easy for you. What would that intro music be? Now, I know you've had a few different intro songs throughout your career, but let's kind of pick one song that if you could choose at this, whether it's like a AC/DC or whatever it happens to be, if you could choose one song to close out a ball game, what would that song be?
Yeah, that's tough. I don't follow baseball anymore. I don't have the bandwidth for it. I do this thing on Twitter or X, what do you say? Every couple of months I tweet that baseball is fake. It upsets everybody and makes me laugh. I know what you're getting at, you know, the closer number coming in, you know, at the end of the game. Yeah, I mean, AC/DC Back in Black would be one. Gimme Shelter from Rolling Stones would be cool. And a real song that I used for years and years independently before I was on TV was My Generation by Limp Bizkit. So any one of those three.
And one of my favorite things to see is when the moms get a hold of the walk-up songs. If you've ever seen those Twitter videos come across where the little leaguers come up with their batting intro song, but the moms get a hold of it, it's like Baby Shark do. What is that one guilty pleasure song that, you know, you'd have a little bit of a laugh if you came out to the plate or came to close the ball game in? What's that one song that's probably a little bit out there, but you'd be down for?
Man, that's a tough one. I mean, the Nickelback hate got out of control. So I mean, anything by Nickelback, I've loved them, always have loved them, always will love them. Never understood why so many people were hating on them. But I can't remember, it was like a children's program in Canada. Maybe you remember, but they had a really funny song called Peanut Butter and Jelly. Peanut butter and jelly. And I don't remember the children's program from Canada, what it was called. But that was really popular when I was little. And I switched out one of our pregame skates in hockey for my hockey team to that song. And it was maybe only funny to me, but I thought it was pretty funny.
See, I think a bunch of kids in the locker room for a hockey game, they'd probably all find some humor in that, or even grown-ups for that matter. I mean, the hockey locker room is kind of a different bird altogether. Like I've played hockey, I've coached hockey, I've coached football, played football. There's a very distinct difference between the mindsets of both athletes. You just want to kind of talk about that. Maybe the mindset change between maybe a hockey player and maybe even a professional wrestler, because that's going to be two different things. Even though it's the same, it's going to be very different.
Yeah, I mean, the difference is, you know, a team concept and an individual concept, obviously. I'm a team of one. You know, I'm an independent contractor. I work for myself. I pay myself. I have my own health insurance. I'm a team of one. I work on TNA wrestling, and there's definitely a team aspect that comes to that. But in the end, we're all out for ourselves and have to protect ourselves and think about ourselves. Where hockey is very communal, you know, team first, no I. I mean, I know that's all cliche, but it is the one sport where that still largely exists. You know, I'm friends with a lot of guys that play in the NHL. I still play hockey myself, and in that dressing room and in the NHL itself is filled with these amazingly interesting people, larger than life characters that you never see, because the culture of hockey is, no bulletin board material. Don't say anything, untraditional, or don't say anything to rile up the other team, or, anything to like signal yourself out, which is a huge problem for the sport, in my opinion. And the reason why it's always been, the number 4 sport in North America is because there's not anything really interesting about the players. I mean, other than that, they're freaks of nature and insanely good at this really, really difficult thing. There's not a lot of players that you could pick out of the pile. They're all the same. They've been beaten down and trained and, basically forced into this box, and everyone has to be the same. Everyone has to look at things the same. Everything has to say the same thing. Me for, I before team, and team mentality and all that stuff, which is great. But in the end, if you want the league to grow, you want people to be interested in that don't know everything about hockey, then you have to let these guys be themselves. Because the truth is there's so many interesting guys, wild personalities within the NHL that no people will ever see or know because of the culture. And I think it's the biggest problem the NHL faces, and I don't know if it'll ever be fixed.
And we've kind of done this with this hockey culture since day one. My 10-year-old comes to the rink in a suit like the rest of his teammates, and it's not really letting that personality show. We see that in the NBA, the NFL, all these different kinds of outfits, basically to go with that player's personality. In hockey, from a very young age, it's all the way up. We all talk about wide receiver show that just came out with George Kittle, Amon-Ra St. Brown. You get a kind of an inside look there. Could you imagine a show just about goalies? Like, how weird would that show be? Like, my kid's a 10-year-old and he's not all there.
Yeah, I mean, as a guy that comes from the hockey world, obviously goalies are, very singular. Some of the most interesting personalities in hockey have been goalies. Ilya Brizgalov, and there's a bunch of guys that come to mind. But yeah, I mean, the truth is I mean, the goalie, being a goalie is strange. You're on an island. You're the only player that plays the whole game. I mean, unless you do really bad, I guess. Is a really singular position in sports, and I've attempted my a few passes at it myself, and I can say it's the hardest position in any sport. And anyone that's arguing or wants to argue or say that I'm wrong, you can go ahead and give it a try just once. It's the hardest position in any of the professional sports.
Yeah, I kind of mark myself as the goalie whisperer. There's not much I can give you for advice, but sometimes you just got to talk to them because you don't know where their head's going to be. And like you said, 5 other guys can screw up in front of you. If the goalie gives up that goal, everyone looks at the goalie for that. Hey, you let that goal in. But that being said, We're talking sports here. We know hockey was a good part of your early development in your career, right? So how did you get into sports? And let's kind of talk about how maybe that early touch of hockey kind of developed you to be the person you are today.
I mean, yeah, I've always loved sports and being active and just trying my hand at anything. I would say in life, I'm very experiential. Like I want to experience everything, good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, you name a sport and I've tried it, from tennis to BMX racing to inline skating to hockey to baseball to fast pitch to slow pitch to lob ball, rugby. I was keeper in goalie in soccer, or English football, if you want to call it, whatever you want to call it. But I've tried every sport. I would say that I'm probably not very good at any of them, but enjoyed it all. Professional wrestling has just been it was the combination of all my loves. I loved sport, I loved athleticism, but I also loved drama and improv and stage and singing. That sounds weird now because my voice is mixed up, but so it was just basically all of my favorite things in the world smashed into one thing. And there's just nothing like it on earth. Absolutely nothing like it on earth. But yeah, from a very young age, I've been into sports. I didn't play organized hockey until Pee Wee, which is where they introduced hitting. I don't know. I don't really know the reason why. I mean, everyone I knew played, but I didn't play organized hockey until later in life. But I still play. I played last night here in Nashville at I think our game was at 10:30 at night, which is pretty wild. I don't have to wake up and go to work, but everyone else I play with does. So hockey's gotten very big here. There's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sheets of ice 365 days a year, and they're busy from morning till probably midnight every day of the week.
Yeah, we just had some kids here in our local association actually go down to Nashville for a huge minor league hockey tournament for 10, 11-year-olds. So, I mean, we're just talking about the growth of the game in general and how it's kind of spread out there. Now, the one thing I did notice, like in hockey and everything else, you mentioned wrestling and all these other sports kind of combining together to get you to where you are. We're seeing more and more athletes getting opportunities in the wrestling community where they've reached out to athletes, whether they're former football players, gymnasts, whatever they happen to be, just to bring that kind of athleticism up. And we're seeing that across the board, whether you watch TNA, AEW, WWE, whatever it happens to be, we're seeing a more and more athletic product coming out there each and every day. Now, when we talk about content creation from a fantasy sports aspect, how has your career as a professional wrestler transitioned over into your career as a fantasy sports analyst?
Yeah, I think it started. It's going to date me for sure, but I mean, my kind of transition, or the door being open for me in that world, was before content creating was even really a thing. You know, it was the FNSTY network, owned by Anthem Sports. It's called Sports Grid now. And that's where, they kind of gave me my first kind of opening. A guy called Nando DeFino and me met up in Canada, and I did a kind of a tryout thing on TV. The truth is I think the world of professional wrestling prepares you for anything, and I mean anything in front of the camera. Like, the one thing I'll say is I just, as a performer, as an analyst, as a whatever, I won't be outworked. Nobody is going to outwork me. I'll show up. I'll stay late. I crunch all the things. Part of that is because my day job, or whatever you want to call it, night job, doesn't require me my attention for more than 15 or 20 minutes out of the week, right? So I have all this time in the world to be crunching numbers and reading stuff and researching and doing things like that. The other thing is I've been on TV for almost 20 years. I'm comfortable in front of the camera. I've been asked to be funny. I've been asked to be mean. I've been asked to be serious. I've been asked to do lots of different things and worn several different hats. So, the comfortability of being in front of a camera is very easy for me, and has kind of always been easy for me. I don't really think about it. The other part is being able to improv and, adapt to any situation quickly and concisely is another thing that wrestling has taught me. And what it's taught me mostly is why I'm still relevant 30 years later, is playing to my audience and understanding what that audience wants to see, what they want to hear, what they want to take part in, and what kind of product they want to consume. And it doesn't matter how good you are at anything, or how much you know about sports, or how much you know about knitting or music or whatever it is, the show that you're creating. If you're not creating something that somebody wants to see and making it in a digestible way, it doesn't matter how good or how smart you are. In the end, this that we're doing right now, what I do for a living on TV, or what people do on the radio, is entertainment. Sport is entertainment. The minute they start accepting money for tickets, it's entertainment. So anyone watching this, don't ever kid yourself. Sport is sport, and it's done in a serious way. But what drives the ship is the money. That's why people want to do it. And I've had a job in wrestling full-time job for 20 years, but I've been doing it for almost 30. And if you don't know how to perform to make your audience happy, you'll disappear pretty quick.
Or you can always just kind of go into the stands with the sign that says "Don't fire Eric Young" and see how that works out, and get the fans in behind the corner that way.
Too. Yeah, that worked out fine too.
that went off huge. But you mentioned the thing here that I don't think a lot of people get is when you're in the content creation, especially on TV, a lot of it is improvised. Things change very quickly. And when you look at football players, hockey players in particular, they're very regimented. I mean, everything has to be done in an order. A meal has to be a certain meal at a certain time. The nap has to be at a certain time. when I've been working in an arena here most of my life, and we've had the opportunity to see some wrestlers, there's no routine. I mean, I watched guys grab the glass cart and start doing pull-ups just to get a quick workout in before they go to the ring. So would you say that's probably the biggest asset you've brought over from one career to the other, just being able to find a way to get the job done, even if it's not maybe conventional?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is if you can't get it done, then they're just going to find somebody that can. You know, the product of pro wrestling is bigger than all of us, and if you can't perform when you're asked to, then you just won't last. You know, and I joke around with a lot of my buddies. You know, I have some professional athletes that live in town here, and guys that I've met while being on the road, and guys that are fans, or guys that get free tickets and come down and watch the game, or watch the show for one night. What blows most professional athletes' minds is that there is no off season in pro wrestling. And I mean, I haven't had an off season in 24 years. And the longest time I took off in wrestling was about 5 months when I tore my ACL. I was still appearing on the shows, but I didn't do anything in ring for 5 months. And that's the longest I've gone since 1997. So I could show up next week. We're in Tampa Bay, and I could show up there on Friday night and they say, you're wrestling a match that's 65 minutes long. And I need to be ready to do that. I also may just be in a talking segment backstage that takes a minute and 30 seconds to shoot. So it's a wild world, man. I wouldn't change anything. This is not complaining in any way. It's all I've wanted to do my whole life. It's what I dreamt of doing when I was a little kid. And like you said, in a tiny little town like that, it's a wild thing for me to be in the position I'm in. Like, I'm not very good with math, but mathematically, the chances of me sitting here talking to you in my current iteration is probably less than 2% because of where I come from and who I was, and how few jobs there are in this industry. So it's a very cool thing. And like I said, we're also talking about sports and fantasy sports, how it opened the door. Like being on TV and having kind of a built-in following. I get to jump over a bunch of people. That's not lost on me either. There's lots of people that are just as good at this or maybe better than me, but I paid my dues in another way. I have a built-in audience. I have on social media, I have combined over 600,000 followers, which is, in the fantasy area, one of the biggest audiences out of anybody doing it. I bring that automatically. Wrestling fans are, if nothing, loyal, and will watch me do almost anything. Explain through all the different things I've done in my life. I had a fishing show, I had an extreme sport show, I did a travel show. I'm working on a new show that has to do with music right now with Access TV. So yeah, wrestling has opened the doors. That doesn't mean that I had to jump through them. I wanted to jump through them. Fantasy sports was a huge part of my life. I've been in hockey and football leagues for 18 years plus. And I'm a commissioner in a couple of those leagues. I love them. I love talking about sport, thinking about sports, breaking it down. Hockey and football are my two big ones, but I kind of loosely follow lots of other things as well.
I would have to imagine it'd be a few like TNA fantasy football leagues kind of on the go that you kind of oversee from time to time. Now, commissioners, they make a lot of decisions. I mean, you've made a lot of decisions probably throughout your life. We know that there's always that fork in the road, that one path leads one way, another path leads the other one. You have to make that decision. So can you kind of tell me about one decision that you made that basically changed the trajectory of your life or your career?
Yeah, the decision for me was going into wrestling school right at high school. I was 17 years old and I graduated high school. My mom was an educator, was a teacher, was, highly, highly educated. Wanted me to go to college or university. My dad, on the other hand, didn't graduate the 8th grade, quit in the 8th grade to work and then opened his own business and did a million things in his life. And so it was, really lucky for me. I got to see the world through these two different lenses. And I would say both my parents, who are no longer with us, but were very supportive in whatever it was. And my mom's thing was like, what if it doesn't work out? And then, you have nothing to fall back on. And I said to her, like, I know who I am. I wasn't very good at school. The reason I wasn't good at it is because I didn't like it. there was very few teachers that could grasp my attention for more than a few minutes at a time. And it wasn't that I definitely don't have ADHD. And if I do, it's a very light amount of it. But I've really just been a person, passion runs my life, and I'm not passionate about mathematics or spelling or anything like that. I only cared about professional wrestling. That's what I loved, and that was the first thing other than my family that I fell in love with, and it consumed my life most way through high school, and still does to this day. So, but yeah, that decision to go straight into school, like my argument with my mom was she wanted me to go to university, and I said, well, I'm just going to get a bunch of money from the government, hang out with my friends, eat pizza and drink beer, and never go to class. I know that's what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to be $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 in debt, and then try to go to wrestling school when I'm 300 pounds and I'm 30. That doesn't make any sense. So, I can go to college in a wheelchair. What I can't do is go into professional wrestling when I'm 35. So 2 weeks after high school, I was at a pro wrestling school, and things accelerated very quickly for me. It was the first time I had ever done anything that I was good at it right away. Like almost instantly was good at it, and which was very strange for me to wrap my head around. I wasn't like that with hockey, or I think the only close thing to it was rugby. I was pretty good at rugby through high school and maybe been able to play professionally overseas, but I didn't love it. Like I love professional wrestling. So the biggest fork in the road was right after high school, choosing what to do. And, even at that age, I knew that I wasn't going to be happy doing anything else. So I put every one of my apples in one basket and just started pursuing it like a lunatic.
Inside or outside the ring, you've had accomplishments. I mean, you can go on to Wikipedia or Fandom or something. You can see all the titles that you've had an opportunity to hold. Is there one moment maybe that kind of you're more proud of in your career than maybe the others?
One of the big milestones and the only kind of goal I set for myself when I started was signing a contract where I could tell that this is what I did for a job. For 6 or 7 years, I didn't do it for a job. I had a regular job to supplement my wrestling. But in 2004, 2005, when I signed my first contract, I was able to say that this is my job. This is what pays my bills. That was a huge point of pride for me. Wrestling wise, tons of matches. I forget more than I can remember. Obviously winning my first world title. My mom and dad were both still with me. My mom happened to be down, visited me in Nashville, and I didn't really know that it was going to happen until kind of I got there. And I ended up winning the world title, and you have to carry them with you, which nobody tells you about. It's really irritating going through the airport, having this giant metal belt in your carry-on bag. But yeah, I got home and I got to take pictures with her holding it, and it was a surreal moment, and I think she was always proud of me, but that made it really real to her, even though it's winning a belt isn't real. Like someone told me that I'm going to win it. I didn't really win anything, but it is like a multi-million-dollar company saying, you're the guy, you're the flagship, you're the number one guy here. And I've done that twice, and been close on several other occasions. So, but that was a big one for me. The most memorable one for me was watching my mom look at it and hold it, and the smile on her face, taking pictures with it it made it real. And I think it made it real for me too. So those would be the big ones.
All right. And then I just kind of touching on this a little bit here, the wrestling, there's been obstacles in wrestling. First off, coming from Florence, Ontario, to be a professional wrestler is one thing. To come back from an ACL and probably multiple other injuries, there's obstacles you faced throughout your career as a professional athlete. But what about as a professional sports analyst? What kind of obstacles have you faced, and how have you kind of overcome those?
Yeah, and this is nothing that you don't understand. Is there's a million of us, and the internet and social media is this amazing tool, but it also grants anybody that's willing to do the work the ability to have their word out there and have their face out there. That's a great thing. and it's also a really difficult thing to compete with. I'm lucky enough that I have this built-in audience, right? So it's for smaller companies, like Sports Grid and FTN and places like that. Like I'm an asset there because I can bring eyes to that company just by showing up. Me being, okay at what I do and being entertaining and being interesting and all those things, I think that's a cherry on top. But I think the number one thing, and that's not lost on me, you know what I mean? Like I'm able to keep those jobs and open those doors because of who I am in the other world. The other world is a juggernaut in the media industry. Professional wrestling has it's just really now starting to get its due. Like the WWE, obviously being WWF, being the big fish in the pond. They just sold their rights for their Monday night show to Netflix for $29 billion. Like that's not a mistake. Netflix isn't the number one viewed app with hundreds of millions of people subscribing to it worldwide because they don't know what they're doing. Pro wrestling is an absolute juggernaut, doing millions and millions of viewers every single night of the week, all year round, and it never ends. There's nothing else that does that in the world. NFL does, obviously double, triple, 4, 5, 6, 10 times the numbers, but it's only for 18 weeks. It's not 52 weeks out of the year. This is why companies like McDonald's and Walmart and Burger King and Pepsi and Coke, these billion-dollar industries, are investing in commercials on these shows because they're seen by millions of people week in and week out. You can't buy that kind of advertising. The secret is out that pro wrestling is a juggernaut, and it's the best part about it. That gives me an advantage, and I like to use that advantage to my advantage. I love this space. Some of my very good friends, we talked offline. Chris Meany is one of my best friends in the world, and I met him through this world and would have never met him. Jake Seeley is a very good friend of mine. Nando DeFino. I'm friends with Matthew Barry, Nate Rabbits from the Fantasy Focus back in the day. The list is a mile long. And, I've met some of the kindest and best people through this. And we have this joint thing that we're interested in: sports and stats and analysis and, just kind of thinking about these games that we love. And it's a beautiful thing, man. If you're passionate about something, I'll talk to you all day about it. And I'm passionate about sports and fantasy sports. And now, the gambling side of it is opening the door for millions of other people. So it's a really cool time to be in the space.
I love that you mentioned the popularity of fantasy sports there, as far as anybody can get into it. Anyone can get into that content creation. And you kind of mentioned wrestling. It's a much smaller group of people who can do what you do. You and I, we're about the same size, height-wise, weight-wise, but we don't look anything alike. I'm not going to take promo shots without my shirt on. I might wax my chest for fun, but I don't look anything like you. So there's no way I'm doing what you do. That being said, one of the more underrated aspects of professional wrestling is just how many great Canadian wrestlers have come through. So I'm going to ask you to blind rank. I'm going to give you a wrestler. You're going to put them 1 through 5. I'm not going to give you another one until you rank them. I took your name out of this because, hey, we don't want to convolute this thing anything more than it has to be. So I got 5 Canadian wrestlers here. Yeah, no, you're right. Don't sell yourself short, man. But this is a great list. There's been some fantastic ones. I'm going to leave a bunch of good ones off to kind of mix it up a little bit. But the first guy that comes to my mind here, top 5, Kenny Omega. Where would you place him 1 through 5?
He's been hurt for quite a while, so hasn't been seen a lot. But I think bell to bell in the last, probably 5 years to 10 years, he's one of, if not the best to do it. Just doing stuff that would appear, if you watch wrestling in the 80s and 90s, like the stuff that he's doing would have seemed humanly impossible. And he does it with ease. Nice guy, interesting guy. And just as far as physical performance, he's one of the best to ever do it.
So where do you got him? 1 through 5. Where do you got Kenny?
Oh, geez. Well, I don't know who else is in the thing, so I can't rank him. Am I just giving a number of 1 to 5? That's the fun part.
It's a blind ranking.
Well, I'll put him at 5.
Where do you got him? Where would you put him?
He's hurt, not really doing much.
All right. All right. Well, one of my favorite wrestlers here of all time happens to be Rowdy Roddy Piper. You want to talk Canadian? He was Canadian. They gave him the whole Scottish kind of thing to him back in the day, but he's still Canadian. We're going to still put him on this list. Where do you got him?
Yeah, I mean, Roddy was a guy that compelled me to pay attention to wrestling. And I look back at it now and like physically, he was not very coordinated. Not doing a lot with his body, but he made people care. And the number one thing, and I say that I do seminars or young people ask me for advice, is nobody had more belief in themselves than Roddy Piper. He believed that he was Roddy Piper. So that made people believe that he was Roddy Piper. I mean, obviously, one of the most compelling characters in and out of the ring. And as far as talking, mic work and promo work, maybe one of the best to ever do it. So let's put him at 3.
Yeah, Piper reminds me of that old school hockey player who's going to have a cigarette and a beer between the intermissions compared to these new athletes that are pounding back the salads and whatnot. Now, the next one, I was kind of hoping to kind of goat you to one of these other guys higher on the list, but it's going to be Bret Hart. Where would you have Bret Hart? I mean, can you have him anything less than 2 on a list?
I mean, not if you're being honest with yourself. I think there was a point where Bret Hart could have ran for prime minister in Canada and probably won. One of the most recognizable Canadian athletes in the world, still to this day, hasn't wrestled in almost 2 decades. So Bret Hart has got to be one of my favorites. He's always been kind to me and complimentary to me. One of the best physical storytellers ever in our business. And this business and me and other Canadian people, we owe a lot to Bret. And he would be number 1 unequivocally.
One of those guys that has talked highly of Bret in the past, like most Canadian wrestlers, has been Chris Jericho, who I want to bring up here too. You want to talk about the Ric Flairs, you want to talk about the Kevin Nashes, the guys who have been doing this for what seems like forever. Well, Jericho has also been one of those guys who's done it forever and reinvented himself each step of the way. So where would you put him on your list?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably 2. And I don't know if Jericho gets a lot of praise, but I don't know if he gets the praise that he really deserves. He's been, top of his game for 3 decades and is still one of the top talents in the world at over 50 years old. And we're buddies. Me and Chris are buddies, and he's a good guy and has always treated me well and treated me with respect. And a guy that has done everything. And like inside the ring, outside the ring, and outside of the professional wrestling business, he's hosted game shows. He's been in movies. He's a full-time touring musician. Like it really just doesn't seem limit. There's no limit on what he can do creatively, what he can do entertainment-wise. He's one of the best Canadian pro wrestlers and one of the most versatile entertainers in the world. And I would say that he's a buddy of mine, a guy that I call a pretty good friend.
All right, so we've got Hart at 1, Jericho at 2, Roddy Piper at 3, and we've got Kenny Omega there sitting at number 5. That means our next guy we're going to talk about, he comes in at number 4 by default. Guys I left off this list, Val Venus, who I know you've wrestled before. Oh, the late, great Owen Hart. We could throw Sami Zayn, Edge, Christian, Lance Storm in there, Rick the Model Martel, Kevin Owens, Dino Bravo, Ted. I mean, we can go on and on about this list, but how about Bobby Roode? How about we throw him in there at number 4? Yeah. What do you got to say about Bobby Roode?
I mean, one of, if not my best friend, a guy that I talk to, at least once a week. And in my opinion, maybe the best professional wrestler, if you're, marking off categories of what's important in pro wrestling. Look, check. Ability to talk and be relatable, check. Athleticism, check. Believability, check. I mean, he just checked every single box. If I was to make a list of people that if I had to wrestle a match every day for the rest of my life, and I hope that doesn't happen, but if I had to, he'd probably be my number 1 choice for people that I would choose to do that with. So yeah, he's one of the best professional wrestlers of all time. Never really got his full chance, never really got his due, but anybody that's done it, anybody that's worked with him would say almost the same thing that I'm saying. He's one of the best to ever do it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because he's one of those guys I think is very underrated. I think you're a very underrated as far as the wrestling world's concerned. And in the fantasy industry. I know there's bigger and better things coming. So what do you got coming down the pipe here next? What do you got coming on FTN? What else do you got going on?
Yeah, me and Chris were talking the other day. I think we'll do a couple season preview shows. FTN with our Bet Set Spike show. That's a football show. We don't do it during the year because there's so many football shows, but that will transfer over probably early September. Start back into the hockey world. It feels like the season just ended, but I miss hockey already, and I can't wait to get Dangle Bet Selly going. That's on FTN Network. You can watch it on YouTube. You can watch it a million different ways, and yeah, it's just such a huge part of my life, a thing that I love, and FTN has been awesome to me. And like you said, it's a company that's just growing like crazy, and I'm proud to be part of it.
With that being said, hey, Eric, I've enjoyed catching all these things here. I know Chris is one of the best fantasy minds, so putting you two together each and every week for these shows, absolutely love it. I couldn't recommend it more to anyone else who's just maybe trying to get their foot into sports betting or fantasy sports altogether. That being said, make sure to check out Eric Young at the Eric Young on Twitter or X, whatever you're calling it these days. So for Eric, I'm Matt Donnelly. This has been Behind the Grind, and we will see you again next week. Take care.